Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday.
Hey, guys. Happy Thursday.
And a happy summer solstice.
Indeed.
Yes.
Hell yeah. It's here.
It is here. The height of the light is here, and we're already, on the other side of it.
I know,
it was
it's crazy.
yesterday.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's lots of energy going on. We actually got a chance to go over to our neighbor's house. He hosts both a winter and summer solstice party.
Right.
So that was exciting. Had a few friends come along with us, so that was awesome.
Totally. Had a good time.
Definitely had a good time. Definitely always reminded now when there's big social events and stuff, the next day is like a recovery
Yeah, I feel that.
day for sure. So moving a little slower in these parts, but still getting stuff done as always. And we're here for last Thursday.
Definitely. And before we get started, just wanted to say thanks to all of our patrons. So that is Chance, Benna, Inland C, Liam, Amy, Miri and Hank, Jenny G, Erica, Moonlander, Mary, Catherine, Logan, Cook, Lily Vine, Debbie, and Natasha. Much appreciated, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. I say this almost every time, but you guys are helping us to keep things rolling over here by being patrons. It really makes a big difference. So thank you so much.
For sure. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so at patreon.com/thehealinghome.
Yes. Awesome.
Yeah, totally. Alrighty, let's go full screen here.
Woo!
Yo!
What's happening, everybody?
Happy Thursday.
Yes.
So, we are continuing our series on the 1960s counterculture movement.
Yes.
And Charles Manson and all of the things that are kind of related to that stuff.
Yes.
Which is a lot.
There's so much. And I said it last week, but this subject matter excites me so much. So now when we're thinking about, last Thursday topics, it's like there's like an extra spark or something.
Guys, she is glowing over here because of Charles Manson and talking about Woodstock and PSYOP stuff in the 60s.
God. Yeah.
And so you're in your element, I would say.
I am. So, it's like a lot of people know me for obviously herbal, plant, gardening, all of those things, which I love and give me a spark as well. But, I have lots of other interests too, and this is one of them, and it's a really interesting rabbit hole, and so I'm happy that we're exploring it, really.
Yeah, totally. I agree, for sure. And also, too, I would say that arguably, obviously, this is one of your first loves.
Yes, I would say that. Yes, this is definitely a first love because, I've talked about it before, I'm sure, but from a young girl, I was always attracted to this era, for whatever reason, mostly for the music and then for the seemingly awesome culture that I was learning about when I was younger. You know what I mean? And so it's not to say that there weren't awesome things that happened during this time. And there was somebody that left a comment on last week's video talking about how to remember to talk to people that were alive during that time. And, we've been blessed to be able to know a handful of people that were. Mm-hmm. And I always am continuously seeking out people in my own way who were alive at that time. And I seem to cross paths with people who have some insights.
Sure.
And it's always been really interesting.
I will say, though, a lot of the older people who were alive back then were also conditioned and programmed by the same stuff that you want to learn about from them.
Right.
And so a lot of times they're actually very reserved and they're not as skeptical, I guess, as they should be.
Yes.
So when you do find an older person who was around back then and they were skeptical and they continue to be skeptical and everything else, like that's a huge win. Because those people are far and few between. That's
a great point because the amount of people that even were in our close circle that, were kind of, when we first gave our Laurel Canyon Manson presentation.
Right.
We had pushback from a few older people who were in that generation because they said, no, it was a real thing. We were really doing things and this and that. I was there. So it wasn't a psyop or whatever. And I get that. I totally understand why they would feel that way. And it's not to say that they weren't doing things, that they weren't, living that life or whatever. But when you look at it hindsight, from a bird's eye view of seeing how culture creation happens and what goes down, it's like, well, it's kind of hard to deny that a lot of the meat of it was created and then, funded and in cahoots with all sorts of stuff. So
it's still a sacred cow for them.
it totally, yes. Right.
So
yeah, it's a good way of saying it.
I totally get it.
Yeah, me too.
So maybe what we'll do here is take a drink.
Yeah.
And then address the chat, and then we can get into stuff.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool.
All right. So today, I was going to bring the package in. It's not that big of a deal. But we have Dandy Blend, which is one of my all-time favorite coffee substitute drinks, along with chai.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
It's a good one. This is a good combination.
Yes. My body needs this right now.
Mm-hmm. I feel that too. So the cool thing about the Dandy Blend is that it mimics coffee very well. And so if you are a person that likes chai and coffee, so like a lot of times you can get it at a coffee shop. It's called a dirty chai. You get like a shot of espresso and chai. The flavor is so good, and this really mimics that a lot. So
it's great.
It's really great.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Cool. So if you are hanging out with us right now, thank you so much. You're awesome. Flat Earth hippie Hank, what's up, dude?
Howdy, Hank.
Nice to see you. I like this comment. He left this one early on, but he said George Bush on the thumbnail. And so I don't know if you're necessarily joking about that one or if that's what you're putting forward. I've heard that as well. It's very interesting.
That Manson is George Bush?
I believe so. I have no idea if any of it matches up or what. But
okay.
Anyways, he's just making that observation. Maybe they came from the same clone factory or whatever. Kabir, what's good? What's good? Excuse me. Still working through some respiratory stuff over here, as you guys can probably hear. Sterling Guini, last night's Vibrant is interesting. Context, the psycho warfare never stopped. Yeah, exactly. So last night's Vibrant, which I listened to maybe like 45 minutes of it today.
Okay.
About hip hop and the psyop sort of culture creation aspect of hip hop.
That's a good one.
Especially, I think maybe like 2000s era sort of stuff. So yes, absolutely. Very relevant to the conversation, I would say. And they even brought up Laurel Canyon, and he brought up Al Dog, the guy, his guest, brought up weird scenes and stuff like that, and how there's just a lot of parallels between kind of what we're talking about in the 60s and hip hop in the 90s and 2000s and stuff.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, absolutely. So good point there. Mercury Mel, hello.
Hey, Mel.
Nice to see you. Bird Dog, what's up, dude?
Howdy.
Moonlander / Tattoo Dave, what's good?
Whoop, whoop.
We'll be going live sooner than later to talk tarot. And he gifted me a really awesome deck, dude. That is like, it's good stuff, man. I'm in love with the artwork. So we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I second that.
And Kabir's just saying 2 days will start getting shorter on Sunday, at least in the Northern Hemisphere.
Okay, right on.
Good to know. Still standing. Hello.
Hey.
And then Pedro is here. What's up, Pedro? Just hung out with him last night and this morning.
What up, Pedro?
I had a good time. It was fun. Anyway, nice, guys. So, for today, it's like there's so many. I almost feel like, in a way, what we're doing right now is we decided to go down this rabbit hole for last Thursday.
Yep.
And there are so many threads to pull at. And there are so many figures and I would say key moments. And obviously there's a history before all this stuff. There's a history after this stuff. And so I almost feel like we're still kind of almost like shotgun blasting some of our thoughts out there.
Yeah.
Almost just to kind of go through the weeds and almost like I almost feel like we're sifting through all the information, like almost kind of doing it live in a way.
Yeah, a little bit. It feels like that.
Because even today, as we were talking about what we were going to get around to, I'm like, man, there's so many different approaches here. There's so many different angles that we can, tackle this whole entire conversation. So I have my notes of the things that I want to talk about today, kind of inspired by what you seem to resonate with last time. And then obviously you have your stuff as well.
Right. Which I compiled notes based on what what you wanted to talk about.
Okay.
In terms of like the time frame.
Right.
So just kind of, I thought it would be a good idea to do that. We
Totally.
can kind of keep it in the same time frame because, there, as we said in the beginning, there's so much going on with this subject and everything else that I feel like we're kind of, I don't know, you could almost make a bucket with subjects and just
all of the topics.
Select them,
Yeah.
which actually that might be fun too at some point. But so anyway, I say let's get into it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So one of the things I mentioned last time was the technological angle.
Yes.
And that I feel as though with all of the things going on in the 60s, there is this underlying current related to technology, the advancement of technology, the adoption of technology, and all this other stuff. If I'm not mistaken, one of the things that I mentioned was that, the 60s is well known for being a decade that finally truly brought the news into the home, right? Mm-hmm. So people started watching, war footage in the comfort of their home, and it's the late 40s and the 50s when television adoption was starting to become like next level, right? And so I don't know when the network started really expanding and there were more channels and stuff, but I would imagine, obviously, it's just been progression ever since the 50s.
Yeah.
More channels and then cable TV and all that kind of stuff. And so technology is very much part of the conversation, I would say. I mentioned the wall of sound with the Grateful Dead. We mentioned the fact that acid is a synthetic drug, created in the lab. And so obviously taking people away from maybe more natural, avenues. And so there's all of this stuff going on. And then it really kind of, to me, the technological shift or the next level of it really came to a head in the late 60s.
Yeah, I would say
like
that.
there was this hardcore sort of evolutionary leap seemingly having to do with technology. And it seemed like it was definitely by design, but some of the technology wouldn't be fully realized until many years later. And then some of the technology that they were proposing that existed or exists, if you're looking at it from that time frame, didn't actually exist. There's hoax stuff. So the big thing for me is that when it comes to technology that the governments of the world have, or these intelligence agencies have, or whatever, the controllers, you don't know when they put something out there in the news of like, oh, we have the ability to do this or the ability to do that. We've now created this, or we now have created that. Some of that stuff is a psyop.
Right. Just
some of that stuff
right.
is a hoax.
Right.
So on one level, they put out information about having technology that does not exist or might literally be impossible. And then on the other hand, technology that they have that far surpasses what we have available to us, they keep under wraps. And so they play both sort of angles, I guess. Pretending as though they have things that don't exist, but then having things, and then it's hush-hush to the public. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think when it comes to the moon landing, you're dealing with an aspect of it where it's like, they simply put, I mean, I think most people here probably don't think that we went to the moon.
Probably not.
You know what I mean? If you guys think we went to the moon, let us know in the chat. I'd be curious to know if anybody here
it's
thinks
all
that
good. If that's what,
yeah.
You know,
totally.
it's whatever. But most people probably know.
And so the moon played a big role in this decade. You know,
huge.
It was huge. The whole space race angle, and going to the moon and all this stuff, and it was supposed to be this whole idea of kind of like a united front, that we all have to come together and whatever, work towards this common goal for humanity, but specifically the U.S. And so, do you know when JFK announced that we were attempting to go to the moon by chance?
Oh,
maybe somebody here knows.
Yeah, someone here might know. All I always remember is that he was assassinated in 1964.
Right.
If my memory serves me correct. So it was definitely before that.
So early 60s, whenever it was.
Yeah.
It was announced that we're going to travel to the moon, right? Mm-hmm. And then by 1969, this was put out there on television that we, in fact, went to the moon, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Well, it's interesting that right before that, 2001, A Space Odyssey came out.
Yes.
And really primed the pump for everyone to accept, this whole idea or concept, this whole program. And so to me, that's not a coincidence. I'm not, I'm far from the first person who has ever mentioned this, right? But when you look at the timing of everything, it's very interesting that Kubrick would be making 2001: A Space Odyssey, and then it would come out before the official moon landing. And to me, it does make a lot of sense that he would be the guy that would be tapped to direct the moon landing. And it makes a lot of sense that they would be using a lot of the same technology, filming 2001 and then also filming the moon landing. Kubrick was a technological wizard, basically. And so super, super left brain, super analytical, very, very mental. And he was an innovator. He was an innovator with film. He was also a propagandist, and so it's just like the best and brightest are always tagged for this kind of stuff.
Always. For good reason.
Yeah, totally. So it's just like, if I were faking a moon landing, I would have chosen Stanley Kubrick as well. Who,
Yeah, I mean, especially for the time.
You're going to pick the cream of the crop.
Right.
And so I can't remember how long it was before 2001: A Space Odyssey was Kubrick's previous film released. But he spent a lot of time on 2001.
What was before 2001?
If I'm not mistaken, I could be completely wrong. I think it may have been, is it Doctor Strangelove?
Oh, that kind of makes sense, actually.
Right.
I think you're right, because I know we've looked this up before.
Right.
I think you're right with that.
Yeah, I used to have his whole filmography kind of memorized with all of that stuff. But Kubrick wasn't known for someone who put out films regularly. So he has huge gaps in his career, which leads me to believe that, in part, some of these gaps were because he was working on other projects.
Oh, word, yeah.
That he was working on projects that weren't necessarily connected to Kubrick publicly, And so even I think Eyes Wide Shut was released in 99. And it's I think his last movie before that was, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was The Shining, which came out in 87 or something.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure something along those lines. It's the whole 90s. I don't think he put out anything. And then he put out Eyes Wide Shut. And so to me, he's just a filmmaker. And just so people are aware, I've talked about him before many times, but I'm not expecting people to remember any of this stuff, really. But he was my favorite director. He was my favorite director for a very long time. And when I saw 2001: A Space Odyssey, it blew my mind. And I was just completely taken aback. I was like, this is incredible. And I was like, I don't even know why it's incredible, but it's incredible. And it hooked me in, and I never, ever do this, but I watched 2001 and I watched it again the next day, which is just very rare for me. But I was just impressed by the level of quality with the movie from 1968. And I didn't watch it until I was in my 20s, so not that long ago, in my opinion. So I saw it way after the fact. It wasn't something that I caught, in my younger days, I guess, in my early teens or something like that.
Right.
But anyway, I was super impressed. And then I would research 2001: A Space Odyssey for many years after that. And then after a while, obviously, you're going to come across the information that, well, he probably filmed the moon landing as well. And I'll say one of the guys that put together a lot of interesting information with that is Jay Widener.
Oh gosh, I haven't thought about him in a long time.
So Jay Widener put out a few documentaries about Stanley Kubrick, basically creating an alchemical film. And that it's alchemical in so many different ways, I would say. And that it's designed to speak to people on a deeper level. And that there's multiple, I guess, agendas kind of going on with it. There's multiple aspects of 2001 that it operated at. It was intended for culture creation. It was intended for propaganda. But there's a psychological aspect. There's an alchemical aspect, if you want to call it that, I guess. There's a lot of there's like, if the cinemagician, use cinema as magic, it's like, this might be one of the top tier cream of the crop films that would fall under that sort of category of like film as magic and being able to use it on sort of multiple levels, I guess. And so it's a very special movie. And it's interesting because when it came out, I'm assuming most people here has seen it. But when it came out, it actually wasn't that popular. That's my understanding. But soon thereafter, not too long after it came out, a lot of people started coming to the theater and started watching it over and over. And my understanding is that it really caught on with the hippies, and that hippies would drop acid and they would go see 2001: A Space Odyssey. And 2001, it's well known for having this psychedelic portion of the film towards the end of the project. And people would be in the theater and they'd be tripping balls and they would go through this psychedelic experience, And it is a trippy scene, I'm pretty sure people call it the hyperspace sequence or something along those lines.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
And so word got around, and from what I've heard is that so many people started talking about it like this, that it actually caught on, and then it kind of got a cult following while it was still in theaters. And that its theatrical run was extended way beyond most movies of the day. And so that it was actually in theaters for a long time because of this whole entire thing. And the marketing took advantage of this. And so some of the more popular 2001 posters and stuff like that use a tagline of the ultimate trip. And then they also, some of the posters will have like a psychedelic all-seeing eye, because that's actually one of the aspects of the movie,
right?
Is that they show his eye really close up and he blinks, and one moment it's all psychedelic and crazy colors, and then he blinks and then it's like normal, and so Illuminati confirmed, I don't know. But obviously the all-seeing eye, the eye of providence, that is a classic sort of running thing, that's been put out there many, many times with many artists and celebrities and whatever. And so even 2001 has that, this all-seeing eye business. And so the movie has a lot to do with, obviously, going to outer space, traveling the stars. The main objective in the book is to go to Saturn, but I'm pretty sure in the film they actually go to Jupiter instead.
Oh, yeah.
And so this, in and of itself, I've done podcasts about this. So basically what I think, kind of the whole entire thing about that is that Saturn, under the traditional system, would have been the end of the line. So it would have been the gateway of the threshold to go even further. So it's not uncommon to look at the moon as the first gateway. And that the moon is, according to certain systems, if you're going to astral travel and you are going to go to other places, that the moon is like the first stop that you have to stop at, and then you go to other places. And so the moon symbolically is a gateway in so many different ways. And so it's interesting that we're talking about going to the moon, because it would be the first stepping stone, leaving this place, which personally, I don't even think you can leave this place anyway. I don't think you can leave this place the way we've been taught and told.
Right.
I don't think you can leave this place the way all of the movies and sci-fi films and stuff would have you believe. And that's another thing with this, is that science fiction is a propaganda genre. And the greatest science fiction film of all time, arguably, it probably in most people's lists, is 2001: A Space Odyssey. That it influenced all sci-fi films since. There's countless movies that I've seen that give homage to 2001, because there's so many iconic scenes in that movie, because it had to work. It had to work. It had to be a certain kind of film, and it had such a huge budget that, they could make it perfect, pretty much. And it is, in so many ways, it's kind of a perfect film, I would say. And that's one of the criticisms behind it, is that it's actually very cold. It's anti-human. Kubrick was criticized throughout his career for making anti-human films, and that they lack a distinct emotional quality. And even some people think that that's part of his propaganda. That part of his angle is creating films that aren't meant for normal people. That there's a sterile quality to the characters. There's kind of a sterile quality to the scripts and how everything plays out and whatever. That people have argued that that's actually one of the subliminal angles that he was going for throughout his career, and that this was strategic. And so you can kind of see that in his movies, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you can. Right. Definitely. Because when you think about it, his characters, it's like, not that they're not relatable, but you don't feel, well, I can't say that, because in The Shining, I feel like there is more of that. You can really, you really maybe can identify with those characters a little bit more than any of the other films.
I think so too.
But all of his other films, I feel like, yeah, you're left on the periphery with these people. You're not fully, I don't know. It just feels like you're not fully rooting for anyone.
Right.
In some weird way.
It's almost like things are unfolding.
Yeah, but The Shining, I feel like, because of the subject matter, I feel like there's more relatability there. But I think of, why am I blanking on? A Clockwork Orange.
Right.
In that film in particular, I feel like there's a distance in that whole film.
Right.
You're watching it from a different perspective than any of his other films in some way or something like that. And I have still not seen all of his films, so I guess I can't speak fully on all of it. But that is one of the senses that I've always gotten from his works.
Right. And that was his follow-up, A Clockwork Orange.
After 2001.
After 2001. Yeah, and so what he really did throughout his career, I mean, I knew I was going to talk about 2001 and the 60s and stuff, but now that I'm talking Kubrick, there's all this Kubrick stuff that's coming to mind. But basically, one of the things he did throughout his career was he tackled specific genres and wanted to kill it. He wanted to crush it with every genre. So he makes a sci-fi film. He made the greatest sci-fi movie of all time.
Right.
He makes a horror movie. He makes one of the greatest horror movies of all time. He tried to do the same thing with Clockwork Orange. He tried to create, I don't even know if there's a genre name to it, but there was in the 70s, 60s as well. But technology started getting more portable. It was cheaper for people to start filming things on their own. You didn't need to have these crazy huge cameras. You didn't need to have this crazy, budget. So starting in the 60s and 70s, you started seeing grimier movies, especially in the 70s. You started seeing a lot of pictures that had a smaller budget who weren't maybe necessarily tied to a studio. And people were just doing their thing. And so you have a lot of handheld shots, which is kind of like not traditional Hollywood. Traditional Hollywood, you're actually using like tripods and like all this other stuff.
Right.
And so you started having a lot more handheld shots. It was a lot more intimate. You could be more wild. You could be more sexual. You could be more violent. Blaxploitation films. That kind of stuff, drug use and stuff like that.
Right.
It started becoming more of a thing in the 60s and 70s to do that because independent filmmaking really started taking off. And so Kubrick, even though he's a Hollywood guy at this point, basically, even though he even said things about Hollywood that he did not necessarily agree with, but he wanted to make one of these independent type movies. And so that's what Clockwork Orange is all about, which is why it deviated so much from his traditional sort of style of everything is perfect. Everything is like stationary and every movement is like super calculated. There's wild shots in there and there's crazy
it's
angles.
all wacky.
It's all wacky and stuff like that. So he chooses genres and he wants to create the best of that genre, basically. And this is kind of how he made movies too. Because as an example, for 2001 or for The Shining or whatever, instead of designing something completely from scratch a lot of the times, he would have people go out. So for like the hotel rooms in The Shining, he would have people go out and take photos of like 1,000 different hotel rooms. And then they would come back, and he notoriously did not like to travel too. And so he liked to stay put. Eventually, he's from New York, and eventually he moved to England. And that's where he set up shop. And that's where all of the movies, I'm pretty sure, starting with 2001 or right before, but all of his movies were shot in England. So The Shining is all in England. Eyes Wide Shut's all in England. So he had his own production warehouse studio literally on his property, so he didn't have to go anywhere.
It's so cool. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah. So he would have people go out and they would take photos of all these hotel rooms, and he would basically be like, cool, that's the hotel room for this scene. That's the room for this scene. That's the room for this scene. Find props and stuff that match this hotel room. That's the vibe, basically, is what he would do. Mm-hmm. And so so he would basically, he was very much an observer, and then he would pick the thing and then he would develop it, sort of thing, versus trying to conjure up something from his own mind, I think, in a lot of ways. I think he was way more analytical or something like that. He said something along the lines of like, filmmaking is making like 1 million decisions, basically. So you have to make 1 million decisions in order to complete a film. So the idea is just to try and make the best decisions possible, pretty much. That's how he looked at filmmaking. And he's not wrong in so many different ways. And so anyway, so 2001, A Space Odyssey, he collaborated with people like Arthur C. Clarke. Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001, A Space Odyssey. My understanding is literally the concept of a satellite was invented by Arthur C. Clarke. And he collaborated with people from NASA to create 2001, A Space Odyssey. And we know the whole entire Operation Paperclip business about German Nazis, coming into the fold, creating NASA in so many different ways, being pillars within NASA. And he worked with these guys, to create the film. And so even actually in 2001, it's really, really small. But in the beginning, there's actually, what people have said is that it's actually, it's not a rocket, but it's a bomb. And that there's a bomb floating through space in 2001, early on, I'm pretty sure. And it has a German flag on it as well. So there's this, there's this small example of Germans being involved. And my understanding from when I was more interested in this stuff, but obviously the Germans had a rocketry program. I'm not sure how much of that is a hoax or how much of that is a psyop. But one of the common sort of tales about all of that is that these rockets, the V2 rocket, that some of these rockets were literally brought over to the U.S. and they put an American flag over the swastika. That they just literally covered the swastika with an American flag, put a new vinyl sticker on it or whatever. And
That's
so
funny.
I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's actually accurate or if that's more of a metaphor.
Right.
Or what's going on with all of that. But the degrees of separation between some of these really influential SS guys. I mean, there's no degree of separation. They were collaborating. They were working together. And so this movie, I think, was intended to basically be another aspect of the culture creation agenda that is the 1960s. And so the whole film, or largely a good chunk of the film, is about artificial intelligence, which I think is really interesting too.
Right.
And so the whole entire thing is that the ship, their spaceship, is controlled by an AI named Hal. A lot of people know that Hal, I believe, is it just one letter difference, but IBM, basically, so A B C D E F G H I. Yeah. So IBM is one letter difference from HAL, HAL. And so there's a correspondence between that. And a lot of people think that that was clearly
strategic
by design and everything else.
Right.
So so Hal is this AI, and he controls the whole operation. And basically, he goes rogue, and he goes against the wishes of the crew and everything else because he's part of another hidden agenda, pretty much. And so it really, I mean, to me, it's amazing that in the late 60s, this film, and as I'm saying, it's a big, big project. A lot of people have seen it. It's revered. It had a huge, huge, huge budget.
Well, I was going to say lots of money went in.
Lots of money went into it. You're
Yeah.
not just going to put all this money into this project for no reason. And one of the main characters is an AI. And so here we are all of these years later. And last summer was the summer of AI. It's when things really, really started taking off with AI. And so it was, with Midjourney creating AI imagery.
Yeah, Midjourney. You don't even hear people talk about that anymore that much.
Well, it's because it's so integrated now.
Wow, that's crazy.
It's not because people are using it. It's because it's so common now that there's dozens of Midjourneys. And now what I've been talking about, what I talked to you and Pedro about, is that Photoshop and Adobe, I've been designing since I was 16. Okay.
Woo!
Literally, I had a burned bootleg copy of Photoshop, and I've been photoshopping.
What a bum.
I know. I've been photoshopping since I was 16. I'm going to be 39 here pretty soon.
Nice. Very soon.
Very soon.
July 2nd, everybody.
That's right. Thank you. So literally all of that time, I've been doing my thing, manipulating images, blah, 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 working with clients, all that kind of stuff. And now Adobe has introduced AI into the Adobe suite. And so once Adobe incorporates a new function or a new tool, it's industry standard. They don't do it unless it makes sense. They don't do it unless it's ready to go live, whatever. Photoshop is an AI tool now. It's an AI program. Adobe Premiere is an AI program now. And so it's just wild to me that, I've been talking to George, right, from Third Eye Edify.
Yeah.
We've had 2 conversations about artificial intelligence and everything that's going on with it. Last year, we had a conversation about how wild it is that everything is going this way and how quickly it took off. We had another conversation maybe a couple months ago or a few months ago or something. And it was like, I can't believe that this ecosystem has completely blown up. And you can't even keep up with it, And so AI is here to stay. And there's a whole conversation to be had about, is it really intelligent? Are we really dealing with artificial intelligence? So literally AI could be more of a branding thing than anything else, and that you get into the argument of what does it mean to be artificially intelligent or conscious or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so that's not the conversation I want to have. The conversation I just want to bring up is the fact that AI as a topic of discussion since 2001: A Space Odyssey has been a thing. There's been a ton of movies about AI and the dangers of AI, the potential dangers of AI since then, and that there have been many, many films that have explored the idea that AI is going to be kind of like the thing that does us in. That technology through AI is going to be what collapses society, or whatever you want to say, creates a dystopian future, apocalyptic future, whatever. And now we're at the point where supposedly AI, if that's even the right name or label for it, it's here. So it's like, I think that it's going to be on everyone's phone. It's going to be all the apps are going to adopt it. There's going to be pre-AI and post-AI. And with what Photoshop allows you to do now with AI is absolutely like incredible. It's stuff that would take hours and hours to do. Now you can just do it, and you can literally just ask AI to do it. So if you have a photo and you want it to be twice as tall, but there's no information there, ask AI, can you fill in the top half? And it does a pretty good job with making the trees taller and putting in clouds and birds and the sun or whatever that's supposed to be there, and it gives you options. And if you ask AI, hey, can you put me in a striped shirt? It does it, and just like, hey, can you, shave off my beard? Or can you put a tattoo on my neck or something like that? It does it. It knows all of the prompts. It's smart enough to where you can talk to it almost like a designer.
Wow. What if this is, and this is just what's coming to me right now, what if this whole thing with the AI integration, it's like, because what you're saying too, it's creating a simulation in a way.
Yeah, things are becoming more simulated.
Yeah, so okay, it's like I know the whole thing is like some people think we live in a simulation or whatever, and I don't necessarily think that. But what if this AI thing is them trying to create like the simulation, like they are solidifying the theory, the simulation theory in some way by doing this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're artificially creating simulation like situations for people or something to, I don't know. That's just what's coming to me right now.
Right.
Just the thought, just throwing it into the bucket. Just because to me, I don't know. It's just so bizarre. You can see the difference in this art though. Specifically when it's created for things, like you can tell there's certain things, and we talked about this with Pedro as well, but there's like certain features about people and their faces and whatever.
Their hands are a big giveaway.
Hands. But even if there's not a person in it and it's just like somebody put in prompts or whatever, you can always tell that it's AI generated. A lot of times there's like a soullessness to it. There's not the real like soul of what art, someone who created art. Just for an example, interviewing Maxine Miller on Tuesday, it's like AI can't create art like her.
No,
like there's no way. I mean, and maybe I'll eat my words in 30 years or something.
Well, that's the crazy thing actually, is AI. It learns. It's really good at learning, and it's really good at using examples to create new things. So you could say, as an example, create an image in the style of Picasso. Create a dog. Oh, I want a white dog at a lake in the style of Picasso.
No.
And and it does that. Or if you want it in the style of Van Gogh, or if you want it in the style of Giger or something.
No, I mean, I know it can do that, but I just feel like the soul won't be there though.
No, I agree, but it's very impressive. It's getting better and better and better.
Right.
But I think that what it's going to be is real artistry from real people. It's artisanal. It's no different than going to a restaurant and it's like an artisanal sort of deal where it's like, oh no, they like make everything by scratch.
Right. Yeah. You'll always tell the difference.
You'll always tell the difference, and I think that there's always going to be room for that. So I think that, and you know what, even too might happen is that AI might take off so much and people might adopt it so much that there could be a rubber band effect where people might revolt against it at some point.
That's true.
Which there's even been movies and cartoons and stuff about that.
Right.
Where it's just like people eventually start despising all of the androids and robots and AI and stuff that's out there.
Right.
Because they, in a lot of ways, they're making things more convenient, but convenience comes at a cost. And a lot of times, and that's the whole thing with AI too, is what is going to be the true cost of introducing all of this stuff down the road, things that we can't foresee 10, 20, 30 years from now. You know, what does a child look like who's always interacted with AI on their iPad? And they always ask it questions, and it does their homework, and it's
Not good.
You know, yeah, not great.
Yeah.
So to me, all of that, you know, I bring all of that up because 1968, the freaking
Right.
one of the greatest sci-fi films ever made, one of the greatest propaganda films ever made. I would say in terms of propaganda films, I mean, I don't know if I have a top 3 in order sort of thing, but definitely 2001 is part of it because it sold the idea of space and being able to travel to space and all this stuff. And people's idea of space travel comes from movies.
Yeah.
You know, that's where it actually literally comes from. It comes from movies, but it also comes from the news, you know, and what you see on the news. And Stanley Kubrick filmed the actual footage that people saw on the news, you know. And a really quick aside is that the resolution of what people saw on their television screens, that is the moon landing, it's super small. It's incredibly small. You know, most people today have televisions that are like 4K resolution. You know, that's like kind of a standard sort of thing now. So that's 4,000 pixels wide, you know, or across, however they measure it. But what people were watching in the 60s, it's probably like 250 pixels or something, or like 360 pixels or something, versus 4,000.
Wow.
So the amount of resolution that you're actually seeing, the amount of detail that you're actually seeing, way lower. So it would have been way easier to fool people and trick people by virtue of the fact that if we watched the moon landing, I would love this. Wouldn't it be cool? You watch the moon landing on a television set from that era, and you just watch like the whole evening's worth of programming.
Oh yeah, that'd be wild. That'd be cool.
You know, if there's commercials or news updates or whatever, you just watch it. But I guarantee you'd be looking at the screen like, what the hell is going on? I can barely see what's going on.
Right.
And Stanley Kubrick, he was filming 2001: A Space Odyssey. He literally, what's the thing? So I'm losing all of these the technical numbers, but long story short, he filmed it at a higher resolution than even all theaters at the time. So he kind of, it's like the equivalent of him filming an IMAX.
Okay.
You know, so I think it's like 72 millimeter or something like that. And like the resolution of most films, I think, was like half that, pretty much. Something along those lines. And so he filmed it at super duper resolution. He didn't have to. That was like a bleeding edge sort of decision. But he wanted to future-proof the film so that it could play in places like IMAX, or that you could have a 4K resolution version of 2001: A Space Odyssey. You know, so he was filming a film that was like this big, you know, for theaters, but then what was on the screen was like that big. You know, so what people saw on the news, what people saw on television sets was actually that big. So what people saw of the Vietnam War or whatever, you know, it's like all of the things were like, in terms of resolution today, it's like, you know, it's like that small sort of thing. Everyone's cell phones completely smoke and blow away the resolution of all those old TV sets.
Right.
You know, so anyways, but what I was going to say is that 2001, one of the greatest propaganda films of all time. Schindler's List, I would say, is right up there as well as one of the greatest propaganda films of all time, you know, for so many different reasons. And so it's like these movies are kind of like pillars to some of these campaigns, you know, and I think that it works. I think 2001 worked. It has the tech angle with it. There's the acid, the weird sort of acid thing going on with it being the ultimate trip, and then appealing to hippies via this space sort of hyperspace sequence and everything else. It was very like it was a mind fuck for a lot of people, and so people didn't know how to interpret the ending. That's one of the classic things about the movie, is that, and it's too much to get into, I think, in so many ways, but people did not know how to interpret the ending, you know, so it left people scratching their heads. People weren't really used to that, I don't think, back then. They were used to like complete resolutions,
like being told what the ending is or what it means or something,
or at the very least it like wrapped up.
Right.
You know,
weren't left hanging.
No, you weren't left hanging. It was almost kind of like, wait, what? What was I supposed to take away
So
from that?
he was kind of a pioneer in that respect too. Then
Yeah.
you know, for that era.
And so it must have been completely by design, because I would have to imagine that, you know, they enlisted probably teams of psychologists to go over the script and to, like, you know, they must have done, like, I would assume a lot of what do they call it, like focus group studies and stuff. Like, had people watch it, and like they knew exactly how people were probably going to respond to it.
Right. Yeah, they did. Yeah, I'm sure.
You know,
Kind of like The Exorcist. That reminds me of that same kind of thing.
so now that I'm thinking about it, one of the things with 2001: A Space Odyssey is that what I've always heard with technology is that as technology becomes more integrated and as people adopt it, you see this happen, and it's totally happening right now. But technology will become more human-like, and humans will become more robotic, basically. The robots are going to become more human-like, and they're going to start having faces, and they're going to talk like us, and you could talk to them. It's going to be easier to communicate, blah, blah, blah. And then as we adopt all this stuff, as humanity adopts this stuff, we will become more like the technology itself. And 2001 hits on that with how the people are and with how Hal is.
Right.
So you can talk to Hal, this computer, and play chess with it, and it'll look at your drawings, and it will comment about your artistic abilities or whatever, and it's polite and all this stuff. And then the humans are more cold.
Right.
They're
They
more
are
sterile.
Right.
And obviously, this is a futuristic film for the era, too. So 1968, so they're looking ahead, and, you know, the film suggests that, oh, this is maybe what things are going to look like by 2001.
Right.
We're going to be freely going to the moon. We're going to be freely going to wherever, you know, Jupiter, all that kind of stuff. And the other angle, that's why it's like it just blows my mind how many different things are going on with this movie. But there's totally a COVID viral narrative in the film, too.
Yeah, there is.
So if people don't remember, I can't blame you if you don't remember. But one of the reasons why one of the main characters is leaving Earth to go to the moon is because there was a outbreak of some kind, and they allude to it being a virus. And they actually were using that story as a cover-up for something else. So they were using a story about a viral outbreak to cover up the fact that they found the monolith on a different planet. So the viral story was just literally it's just to cover their tracks.
Right. Well, what do you know?
What do you know? Seriously.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, so there's so many different things going on with it where I'm like, okay, to me it seems like this is one of those films where, like, it was put out at a very specific time. It was strategic with other things that were going on at the time, I would say. It wasn't a surprise that it came out before the moon landing and all that kind of stuff. But it seems to me that they were kind of forecasting maybe some of the other propaganda sort of narratives that were going to come out over the next 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So to me, that's what it seems like, is that that's kind of the deal with it all. So so I think it's an important movie in that way. Again, it came out in 1968. So
Yeah.
before you know, the whole NASA thing really was taken to
The next level.
Yeah, new heights and everything else. But let's see if I talked about everything. I kind of just went for it and just talked about everything. But oh, well, the other thing that's interesting is by the end of the movie, like, one of the last things you see is this like alien baby thing. And some people have referred to it as a moon child. You know, because I'm pretty sure they, like, show the moon and then they show the baby, like, in front of Earth or something like that. But it kind of looks like this alien child thing. And it's interesting because Crowley wrote a book, there it is, called Moonchild. And there's a lot of stuff to be said about the idea that somehow that Moonchild at the end is connected to some Crowleyan type stuff.
That wouldn't surprise me.
And that the Moonchild is like a, the result of a working, basically,
Right.
And so I can't remember if it's the result of the Babylon working or if that's another sort of thing, but this magical child.
That kind of sounds familiar, like that you've said that before or something like that. So
Right, totally. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff to be said about the moon, but when you're looking at it symbolically, if the moon is a gateway, if it is the first passageway or stepping stone out of this place, then it's almost like that decade was a gateway, in so many ways, in taking us to a new sort of frontier, taking us, on these sort of different campaigns and the different things that were kind of put, in front of our face and everything else. So,
right.
I don't know. Maybe there's something to all of that.
Oh, I definitely think there is.
So I want to know, maybe, I don't know if anybody here has any info on this, but I would love to know. It's like, so what was going on with like the astrology of the moon in the late 60s?
That is a good question. Right.
Is there anything to that?
Or it'd be interesting if somebody could cast a chart of the day of the so-called moon landing,
right,
and see astrologically what was happening.
And also, too, I kind of think like maybe, well, I mean, we know NASA likes to name their rockets and their programs after like all of these myths and planets and like all this type of stuff. So they're hip to this stuff. I mean, the idea of taking a rocket to outer space, to me, it's like you're emulating or you're simulating kind of like the return to mother, I would say. That it's like space would be very feminine. And then these rockets are very phallic.
Right.
So I see a lot of sexual symbolism with everything kind of going on here. That it's a I don't even know what you would call it, but it's almost like a sexual, like primitive, primal, sexual mythology kind of being played out for people.
And it was like the sexual revolution.
Yeah, that's true.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And then when I think about the rocket, it being phallic, and even if the moon is masculine, the moon still being the symbolic feminine, and the rocket kind of being like the sperm that like
exactly,
and then inseminates the moon.
Right.
So what's going on with that?
Yeah. No. Exactly. Right. 100%.
Right.
And so I think that one of the things, I've said this before, but I think when you're looking into space, when you're looking at the stars, you're looking at the planets, you are looking into the spirit realm. You're looking into the world of spirit, the underworld, if you will.
Yeah, the waters. And
so you connect with it in a different way than just sending people in rockets to go and explore what's going on out there.
Right.
It's making physical what's actually metaphysical, what's actually spiritual. And so I think that that's one of the big sorts of things, which isn't it interesting that we're dealing with the 60s and with flower power and people kind of like being more spiritual. Isn't that like a part of the thing is like there's this spiritual new agey undertone?
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
Right. With everything else. Mm-hmm. And then what do you get by the end of the decade? You get the Manson murders and then you get the space race.
Right.
And so you're actually kind of deadening the spirit realm. You're making it tangible in a way that it's actually not. And you're convincing people that the way to explore it, it's not by other means, that you physically go. You physically put on a suit, you physically go in a rocket, and you physically go to outer space. And that's just not how it works, in my opinion. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
So I think that if you really want to understand what's going on out there, I think that probably astrology, probably going within and, through spiritual sort of means, I think that you're going to have a closer representation of that realm, and you can actually work with it to your benefit more so that way than ever attempting to do anything physical, than physically trying to journey to the stars or whatever.
Right.
So I think that's kind of interesting as well. Giving people the new age optimism and kind of the spiritual undercurrent of things or whatever, but then actually with the space race, you're kind of capping that in so many different ways. You're limiting people that way. And so what you're taught in school is like, oh, the moon is this big, and Mars is this far away, and this planet's made out of this, and everything else. You get all the technical information about it, but you're not getting the spiritual information. You're not getting the mythology. You're not getting the symbolism.
Or alchemical or anything.
No.
Yeah.
No, totally. So I think that's part of what the space race and going to outer space is all about, is literally, I need to think of a new word, but I think it's turning the spiritual into the material.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And distorting it. So there is all of that. Cool. So, I mean, that's what I have for 2001. I mean, there's more going on with it or whatever. And then I have a few notes about, Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin and stuff. But we can ease into that.
Yeah.
So did you get around to it?
Nice. That's a good rundown.
Oh, thanks.
I mean, well, what I did is I kind of just went through a few things. So in 1968 in general, what was happening? What else was going on in 68? And so when I briefly looked into stuff, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot in 68. So that was kind of a big, ending to something, or another trauma bond kind of moment, And so also you talking about television was kind of ramping up in that sense, because this is when they were really hammering home the Vietnam War footage to people. It was really ramping up then. And LBJ was kind of on a hell tirade of saying we're never gonna lose a war. Basically, that was his thing. So he was very adamant to the public that no, we're gonna win this thing and we're gonna keep going. And it was getting worse and worse and worse, and more people were losing their lives. But then there was more people heading to the hippiedom and this and that, trying to escape the draft and stuff like that. And I found out too then, so the White Album was released in 68.
Oh, yeah.
So this is also when things are really starting to ramp up. So things are getting heated. The heat is being turned up on kind of the culture creation that was all bubbling in the throughout the 60s. And so we're getting closer to the time where Manson and his family members, or his, crew, they were living with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys in 68 for a few months. And the whole story with that is Brian Wilson was the drummer of the Beach Boys, for people who might not be familiar. And for whatever reason, the story goes that Brian Wilson was somehow very attracted to Manson and what he was doing. Brian Wilson was one of the first people to kind of acknowledge him as a potential musician, somebody that had talent. I think also Manson had drugs and Manson had girls, and Brian Wilson liked both of those things. So just like a lot of the people in that time and a lot of people even now. So there was this moment where Manson, the story goes, Manson kind of just took it upon himself to move into Brian Wilson's house. And the story is that Brian Wilson came home from sometime at one point, and Manson and his women were there, and being what they were doing was doing drugs and having sex. And so he walked into that and thought, okay, yeah, you guys can stay.
Right.
And so they lived with him for a handful of months. And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure he had a house in Laurel Canyon, or it was one of the adjacent canyons to Laurel Canyon. And this is also when, Manson was starting to record music. He was being invited into studios. He was being asked by some of these people like Terry Melcher, who was a big wig with the record companies, and these other producers, hey, come into the studio tonight and you guys can record and bring some of your girls and we'll record some tracks or whatever. So at this time in 68, that's what was happening with all the Manson people. And so he was being kind of initiated or brought into the fold in that sense. And the name that they came up with was Manson Family Jams. That was like their band name. And so anyway,
Is that where the family came from? Did they refer to themselves as the family, by the way? Or is this more of like what the news told them?
I think that they kind of did, yes, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I think that they kind of adopted that became something even after the fact, but they did look at themselves as a family unit because just like any gang or crew, a lot of these people are, they don't have a family or they don't feel connected. So
and Manson was kind of like the paternal.
He was the
head.
paternal, and he wanted them to look at him as such and told them that, as we talked about last week, and so that was all going on. And so there's also a pig theme going on. So most people know that pig was one of the things that Manson, was written on these walls after the second night murders. And even the first night, pig was written on like the main door or the front door or something. And another thing that happened in the 68 was the Yippies kind of started forming. They were forming, but in 68 they really came to the surface, and the Yippies were formed by Abby Hoffman, who was like an East Coast activist, and what's his name? Jerry Rubin. So these people kind of were more on the hardcore, like kind of why am I blanking on the name of them? They were political, and they would like go into these they would like set bombs off in the city buildings.
Are you thinking of Weather Underground?
Yes, the Weather Underground.
Yeah.
Kind of the same network. But the Yippies were kind of like making fun of the hippies in the sense of that, like...
They were wanting, I think, am I right, that they were kind of willing to be more violent and militaristic and stuff? Yes,
way more.
Yeah.
And so they would do protests, but it was more like they're making pipe bombs and bringing them and doing all that shit. And I'm very skeptical of Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, by the way, because I would not be surprised if they were kind of in the same vein as a Manson, as like they were either kind of like groomed to be these people, or they were put in these positions, or they were somehow given allowance to do certain things. Although Abby Hoffman kind of was just like Manson, though, like they all become targets of the system at some point too. The system will go after them and arrest them and this and that. And the story with Abby Hoffman is that he eventually went into the witness protection program and like kind of just was like gone, So I don't know, but the Yippies were a thing, and the Yippies at that time would go around to these protests, and they would have a literal pig. And the pig's name was Lyndon Pegasus Pig in, mockery of, LBJ. And so I thought that was interesting that all of a sudden we're having pig. And, we know that the cultural reference for pig is usually cops, but a lot of times it's a political piggy. And that was the whole thing with the Manson crew, was that the political piggies are going to take over, or we're against the political piggies. That was a lot of the things that they would talk about. And then we have the Piggies song on the White Album. And so all of these things are connected. So this is 1968. This is what's kind of like coming through the pipeline culturally. So I kind of thought that was all interesting to take note of. Right. And then the Doors came out with "Waiting for the Sun" album. Their album "Waiting for the Sun," which is the counterpart to "The Moon," which I thought was interesting, and in my opinion is kind of one of the Doors' best albums. But that's just me.
Right.
So that's kind of where I went with this one, just to kind of look at 68 and see what else was happening to compare.
Do you know when, because you brought up the Beatles, do you know when the last Beatles album was released?
I don't, but we do know that they broke up in 69.
They did?
I'm pretty sure they were done in 69, if I'm not mistaken, either 69 or 70. So, because they had like a decade-long run. Right.
So, I just want to look real quick.
I could be wrong, though.
To verify.
Yeah.
So, what? Yeah, 1969.
Yeah, Abbey Road.
It was released on. Okay, so Let It Be was released 1970.
Okay, so they.
But I think it was
Like an afterthought or something?
I don't know. Okay, so right. Okay, so 1970.
Okay.
Okay, so the reason why I bring this up is because, I mean, this lines up perfectly with everything that we're talking about. But the crazy thing about the Beatles is that, I mean, this is perfect to talk about right now, actually. So this would be worth a video, honestly. I've been thinking about it for a few years. I'm convinced the Beatles were tapped in or were designed, which we know that they were designed anyway. And we know that freaking Paul McCartney actually died. The original Paul McCartney died.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so, but the Beatles, and again, perfect timing here, the Beatles relate to cancer. And that they are encoding cancer symbolism. The beetle was the symbol, the creature for cancer in Egypt.
I remember you talking about this. Yeah, this is a good one.
So literally from the beetle, the name, the Beatles, that's already a Cancerian reference, in my opinion. And one of the things with cancers, first full day of cancer over here, right? So that's really cool. That's interesting. But one of the things with cancer is that cancer is more than any other sign, it's shape shifted over the years. And the reason why is because Cancer is the dimmest constellation of the zodiac. And so when you look for it, it's just harder to see. So it's way fainter and more dim than the other constellations. So, in my opinion, this is the reason why Cancer for years, centuries, thousands of years, whatever, has been looked at as different creatures over time. So some cultures saw a turtle. The Egyptians saw a beetle. Obviously today it's mostly a crab, but there are also sky maps that show a lobster or a crayfish or something along these lines. Most of the time it has a hard exterior. There's like some sort of exoskeleton or there's some sort of shell or whatever. And so Cancer has been associated with all these different animals or all these different creatures and stuff. And I'm like, okay, I've known that for a number of years. That's interesting. Cancer is also related to the Chariot card. And so the Chariot card is all about cycles. It's all about movement. It's about the turning of heaven. It's about all this stuff. And so it's about the wheel of heaven, And I would say that the axis, the cosmic axis, the world axis is the center of the wheel, right? Mm-hmm. And so it has a lot to do with time. And it has a lot to do with these cycles and stuff like that. And so this reminds me very much of Cancer kind of having different iterations over the ages. Just it's kind of like it's always like kind of morphing sort of thing. Way more than the other signs, in my opinion. You don't see that with a lot of the other signs of the zodiac. And so that's interesting. Also, the Chariot card, well known for having 4 pillars around him. He has these 4 posts, and it's like symbolic of the 4 corners of heaven. It's symbolic of the various crosses in the night sky, the fixed cross as an example, or something along those lines, But it's very symbolic of the 4 elements as well. And so it's symbolic of the 4 elements, and the charioteer that resides in the middle, he would be considered the 5th element. Okay, I was just talking to you and Pedro about this. And so it's not uncommon as well with, there's several myths like this, but for a charioteer to be pulled by 4 horses. So 1 horse per element. And then the charioteer is the 5th element. He controls everything else. In a way, it's kind of symbolic of our heads. That it's like we have 4 appendages, main appendages, and then our head, the 5th appendage, is what controls the rest of our body in so many different ways. So symbolically, our head, our brain, controls all of the other 4. So the 5th controls the 4 other things. The 5th element reigns supreme over the 4 other elements, yet it is of it as well. Okay. Mm-hmm. So with the Beatles, again, we're dealing with the charioteer and the Rider-Waite deck and a lot of other decks. He's wearing armor, right? Not unlike a beetle, or not unlike a crab or a lobster or whatever, not unlike a turtle. And so we're dealing with the Cancer symbolism in the Chariot card, and we're dealing with the number 4. The number 4 is like a very important number with the Chariot card. And we're dealing with the Fab Four.
Right.
And so you're dealing with 4 members of the Beatles, right? And then they had the Mop Top, which kind of reminds me of like a shell sort of thing.
Right.
It kind of reminds me of a bowl. It kind of reminds me of the exoskeleton of a beetle or something, right? And so whenever you're dealing with 4, they're elementally assigned. Usually the things are... So if you're dealing with 4 gods or 4 whatever, it's like usually they're all associated with the elements. And so to me, the Fab Four plays into all of the stuff that I just mentioned. And then also when you take into account that literally all of their albums were recorded within a decade's time, like less than a decade, I'm pretty sure. All of their albums were recorded. And look at how much they evolved. And look at how much they changed over just 1 decade.
Right.
You go from skinny ties and mop tops and it's black and white to by the end of it, it's like they have long hair and mustaches and it's all Technicolor and shit like that.
Right.
You know, and so it's just kind of like, whoa, they evolved like within 10 years, what would take most people a lifetime or something like that. You know, and so isn't that kind of what they did with culture as well?
Yes.
It seems as though there was a deliberate, concerted effort to kind of like really ramp things up and really change things, you know, in a very condensed amount of time.
Right.
And so I think the Beatles line up with Cancer symbolism for all of those reasons. And then you look at the Rider-Waite deck, the Chariot card, and dude, he has a freaking white square on his chest, which looks like the White,
Album. Right. Yeah. This is a good one. I mean, this is video worthy, or
don't you think?
Having its own thing.
So I think that whether it's synchronistic, whatever, there is a very potent Cancerian overlap with the Beatles.
Yeah.
That's what I've picked up personally.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Definitely.
And then, of course, the Helter Skelter thing with Manson and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. And that being, I think, you know, I do think that that's part of the culture creation with all this stuff. You know, because there's different opinions about what happened with the Beatles and the White Album. And, you know, some of the books talk about how they became obsessed with it. And the Helter Skelter thing was Manson's whole thing about that there was going to be some race war and he was going to be the Messiah that saved everybody from it. And him and his crew were going to be the only people who survived. And he was going to literally be the person that starts recreating a race. You know, that was their thing at that point. With Helter Skelter, that's the story of Helter Skelter, you know, and that they were going to go out to the desert and dig a hole and like be able to, be the only survivors or some shit.
Yeah, right.
You know, so that's the story that goes along with that.
And Helter Skelter, for what it's worth, and you know me, I like aggressive music, I like heavy music, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Helter Skelter, right, is like one of the heaviest songs that was put out ever at the time, right?
I would say it was pretty up there, yeah.
And so
you had MC5 and stuff, and they were pretty heavy, but in terms of like at that time, that's actually like when it's like they're influencing kind of more of like a heavy metal.
And he's like straight out screaming too.
He is, and it's one of the first tracks where he's really going for it.
So you just to say again, you have a band that was like Hold My Hand
right.
early on.
You're right.
And very upright and very stiff and like, you know, whatever, to screaming.
Right. Talking
about Helter Skelter, and it's all like you can't even interpret the lyrics.
Yeah.
Versus earlier on, their lyrics were very discernible and easy to listen to and all of that kind of stuff. And it's about love and, you know, whatever, getting with a girl or something.
Yeah, it basically is.
And so to me, it's just like, think about that in 1 decade, one band going from that all the way to Helter Skelter.
Yeah, no,
that's really extreme. That's a lot of change in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, it is. And it's not to say people don't change or bands don't change, but it's usually more gradual than that. And it's usually they at least stay in some sort of closer vein to what they originally were. You know, sometimes you'll get something that's like, oh, wow, this doesn't even sound like them or whatever. But yeah, the Beatles are a different story. And they were so influential that you have to wonder,
Oh yeah. Right,
So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's a whole nother rabbit hole as well.
It is.
That you can go down for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure. Definitely.
So once again, I would recommend people, if they're interested in this, Mike Williams of the Sage of Quay.
Yeah.
He has done so much research on all of that stuff. I think he's kind of the go-to guy.
Yeah. I would recommend him for sure.
Yeah.
And he's into all these rabbit holes as well with the 1960s and Laurel Canyon, and
Right.
he'd be a fun one to actually try and interview at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
And they know, too, basically. They know who replaced Paul McCartney.
Who?
It's this guy. I'm pretty sure his name, either it literally is Billy Shears.
Oh, right.
Or his name is similar to Billy Shears. But it was another guy from another band. And there's so much evidence. There's footage of his previous band. There's all this stuff that basically links him to being the new Paul McCartney,
And then Billy Shears, what album is it in where they... Is it...
it might be Sgt. Pepper's.
I think it is, where there's actually a line...
And then even Sgt. Pepper's, the album cover and everything else. It's like
Right.
there's Aleister Crowley in there. There's like so much symbolism.
Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah, there's so much symbolism in the artwork.
Right.
That people have decoded and looked at the artwork and is like, oh yeah, they're actually talking about the fact that Paul McCartney died and that he was replaced and
Right.
that the show needed to go on, essentially, And so it seems to me like that's absolutely what happened.
Probably is. They
Yeah.
do it all the time.
So should we hit on real quick Jimi Hendrix and Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin and just kind of like some of the theories that are put out there?
Sure.
But I'm going to go to the restroom first.
Okay, yeah. And this one came up, and I have to give shout out to Pedro because he brought it up, one of the ones we're going to talk about. But basically the idea of going off of the theme of Paul McCartney being switched out, going off of that theme that these celebrities, these musicians, they get switched out. They get their programs end, and then they're replaced with someone else. Or they live on, they die, but they live on as some other character. And so this whole rabbit hole is really interesting. And during this era, there's a few of these musicians that uncannily, when you look at the photos of them and you really study, it's like the same thing with like Bill Hicks and Alex Jones. That's a really famous one of people thinking that Bill Hicks is Alex Jones is Bill Hicks. And when you look at things like the dental structure, the mouths and the teeth are usually where you can really see this stuff. And you can't really deny dental records. And it's not like we've looked at Alex Jones's dental records. But when you look at photos of the teeth, it's very hard to replicate some of these teeth as close to
it's a perfect match.
Right. So
I've seen very close up photos of Bill Hicks' lower teeth and then Alex Jones as well. And it's like, dude, there's literally no difference.
Right.
So
right.
For what that's worth. So yeah, so basically, just real quick, I'd love to know what people here think about everything.
Yeah.
But is Jimi Hendrix still a public figure as Morgan Freeman? I think of the three that we're going to talk about right now, I think that one is the closest to a dead ringer you can get.
Yeah,
if
it is.
If you look at photos of Jimi Hendrix and Morgan Freeman, dudes, it's the same person. It looks exactly like the same person.
Right.
And so really both roles are acted. Both roles it's a character, And so I think that's a good one. I think that one makes sense to me from what I've looked into. And then the other two are a little more speculative, I would say. But yeah. I think Jimi Hendrix, Morgan Freeman makes so much sense.
Yep.
And then the other one that I have written down is some people think that Jim Morrison turned into Rush Limbaugh. And that Rush Limbaugh, so Jim Morrison, towards the end of his life, like one of the last photos of him, he kind of put on some weight.
Oh, yeah. He actually put on quite a bit of weight.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So he put on a little bit of weight, and when you can see that, the just a few extra pounds or whatever, he looks a little bit more like Rush Limbaugh.
No, he does. He totally does. He has that alcoholic puff going on.
Right, right,
You know,
right.
that red, kind of thing that happens. And I don't doubt that things like this happen, really, because I think that these musicians and stuff, if they've been groomed, they're reprogrammable. Like, that's the whole
Right.
thing,
They're assets.
Exactly. And if it does work the way that seemingly it seems to work with the programming of these people, the gender bending of them as well, I don't think that they're far off from this being a possibility.
No, I don't think so either. So speaking of the gender bending,
Yeah.
the last example I have here is Janis Joplin. So maybe you should introduce your relationship with Janis Joplin, because she was one of your favorites.
Oh my God, she was, and I'll say still is in so many ways, because she was definitely very influential to me as a young girl. She was one of my dad's favorite artists, and she was one of my grandpa's favorite artists. So my dad used to sing me Janis Joplin songs all the time, even before I knew like what he was actually saying, like in the cradle kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so I had a big weave with her. I used to really identify with her in ways that were kind of even unhealthy, because I used to kind of like have this thing where I literally thought that, not that I was Janis Joplin, but that I had like some sort of like past life connection with her in some way.
Which, by the way, really influential people
do that to a lot of people.
Totally.
So it's like I'm not unique in that sense, and I see that. But as a young girl, I used to identify with it much more in more of a naive sort of star-studded way. And she's also a Capricorn. And so I used to trip out and be like, oh my God. And then she's a Capricorn too.
And the tomboy thing.
And the tomboy thing. And she was always kind of like, her story is always, she was like the sad little girl. Her nickname would be Little Girl Blue. And so she was kind of like the girl that either got left out, or because she was a tomboy, the boys didn't like her very much. She got made fun of. And so I feel like I identified with that as a younger person, as a teenager especially. And then I learned that I could sing when I was like, I don't know, 14, 15, like I learned I actually had a voice. And I had people and teachers coming to me saying, oh my God, you can sing, you have a voice, you should sing. And I've always, my family has always been very musical and stuff. And so anyway, for me, I had that connection with her then even further. And then I started singing Janis Joplin songs at like Battle of the Bands, and I had friends that would be like, let's do this. You can actually sing this. You sing it better than her, all these sorts of comments. And so then it just like further fueled my connection with her.
Also too, she is someone that you can, like, she's so iconic that you can emulate her style.
Yes.
And that she's kind of like almost, those types of people beg to be emulated.
They do.
And mirrored and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I had an interesting weave with her. And then, she also was known, she like was kind of a reckless person in the sense of lots of drugs, lots of alcohol, lots of partying. And I've read books on her, and you watch documentaries. And she was always the one, though, that, and it's typical, people who drink and abuse substances are typically really sad. They're usually covering something up. They're usually very wounded, and they use the substance or they drink or whatever to kind of drown it out. And there's so many like little stories. There's a book called Buried Alive about Janis Joplin, and it's really great, actually. It's one of the better books I've read about her. But people close to her would always talk about how, she'd be the one that you'd be out at the bar with her, and she would buy drinks all night for everybody and buy the whole table dinner and everything else. And by the end of the night, I always felt used. Like she was just felt like she was being used all the time because of who she was, and she wanted to keep up the image of that she was happy and she's just happy-go-lucky, can take care of everybody, but she was always just really like actually deep down depressed. And the other thing about her, though, that, along the lines of who she may be or whatever.
There's two main threads with this.
Yes, and I think we're thinking of the same thing maybe. But some people say, so the whole tranny thing, the trannies of Hollywood, that like a lot of these famous women are actually men and they've been created to be men and all this stuff. And vice versa. Which I think that if you haven't gone down that rabbit hole and you're open to that, there is some very strong evidence that could be the case. And now seeing how much it's being pushed down people's throats as an agenda, that this is okay or whatever, I almost feel like if they have been slipping this stuff into Hollywood movies subliminally, and having this happen, and then now it's just becoming more of a forefront thing.
It's
makes sense to me.
It seems like it's part of elite culture in so many different ways, and it's part of Hollywood culture and affiliated groups, I think.
Right.
And so now what we're seeing is that it's just literally coming out. It's coming out of whatever closet that would be. But it's literally just coming out now of just being like, oh, yeah, no, this is how a portion of the world, that's how they roll. That's how they raise their children.
Yep.
Some people refer to it as elite gender inversion. And it's been around a lot longer than what most people realize. And what you're trying to say is that it's possible that Janis Joplin is actually a boy. Was a boy, and that they transitioned her or whatever, and that what you're actually looking at is a man,
right,
pretending to be a woman, which kind of cuts to the core a little bit because everybody knows that she is, rough around the edges. And that she's not a typical lady, and that that's part of what's the blue thing?
Little girl blue.
Little girl blue. Not being liked by the boys and not being traditionally attractive and all this other kind of stuff.
Right.
Well, one time when we were watching some of her videos or whatever performances, it kind of became kind of clear to us,
right?
And I don't think that is this something that we've read anywhere, or we're just kind of putting it together on our own.
There's one I know there's one woman that you came across that put this out there, and it was like YouTube stuff that you found, like she put together a whole thing. Okay. I've never read this in a book or anything like that,
right?
But putting some of this other stuff together, that after we've done more trans investigation like throughout the years and whatever, it was like, oh shit, is this going on?
Is this another example
with her? Because and again, just like a lot of this information with the 60s and how I really identified with a lot of the music and still really like a lot of it, it was another paradigm shift for me of just like, holy shit, really? And then come to find out too that there's people that have put together that Janis Joplin might be Amy Goodman of NPR.
And Democracy Now.
Democracy Now.
Right, that's a fun one. That's interesting too.
It's really interesting. It's kind of, I don't know. I mean, I've done, when we learned that this is a possibility, I did do a lot of the side-by-sides on this one. There was some pretty good overlap, especially with the mouth and the dental and the teeth going on. I don't know. And I think that they want to keep these people in these places of power or power, media, whatever. And again, Morgan Freeman obviously is still alive, but Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin, both members of the 27 Club, so died when they were 27, both died in ways that, Jim Morrison had a heart attack in a bathtub in Paris. Okay, and then Janis Joplin dies of what they say was she got a high dose of
a hot shot,
whatever it's called, in her hotel room in LA. But there's also a lot of
wait. All of these people are part of the 27 Club?
Well, Morgan Freeman's not, obviously.
No, but Jim Morrison or but Jimi Hendrix.
Jimi Hendrix too.
Also, all three of these people.
All three of them. And
so
Jimi Hendrix also died weird.
Jim Morrison and Janis Joplin.
Yeah, and he also died of, apparently the story is that he choked on his own vomit. But there's a whole alternative, actually, theory to how he actually really died. And people think that he was actually drowned by wine. And there's a guy who did a series of documentaries called The Last 24 Hours. And he did one on... Kurt Cobain, and he did one on Jimi Hendrix, and he's done a few other ones, and they're on YouTube, and they're actually way more going down rabbit holes of like alternative versions of how these people actually really died. And he has a pretty good theory about the Jimi Hendrix one, or he's put things together about Jimi Hendrix that he may have died. They may have set up the scene to make him look like he died by choking on his vomit, but he actually was drowned from wine. And there's like mafia connections to it somehow. That's the story with him.
If he died.
If he actually died. And that's the thing. So we can't confirm any of this stuff. So Jim Morrison's in Paris. He kind of took himself out of the spotlight. He didn't want to be in the doors anymore. He moved to Paris with his wife, Pamela, and they kind of did the whole thing. They just went away. And so he just fell out of the spotlight.
Which is where supposedly he's buried.
Yes, which we saw the gravesite.
Yeah.
And I'll say, not any expert or anything, but it didn't feel like his essence is there or something. Like it felt more like it was like a show. This is like this was I don't know. This is just the statue of him or something. And
well, I thought, because at the time we already knew this theory.
We did. And
we actually, when we were in Paris, we stayed across the street, literally from the cemetery.
Yeah.
Just coincidentally, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we visited his actual gravesite, and people left like liquor and cigarettes and like whatever.
Yeah.
There's all these little mementos and stuff. And then I just thought about it, and it was just trippy because I'm like, damn, wouldn't it be hilarious if he's absolutely not there and he's actually a conservative talk radio host?
It would be fucking funny. It'd be a trip. Yeah.
Right. So those are three pretty good ones, I would say.
I think so. I mean, and I see Pedro just said, and then became Morgan Freeman. I know. So, yeah, totally. It's like, and thanks again for bringing this one up today, Pedro. But it's like, I think, and he was in the 27th Club as well. So Jim Morrison, Janis, and Jimi Hendrix were all in that same boat there. So you got to wonder about that a little bit. Coincidence? I don't think so. Program? Probably. And then it does make me think about all the other people who are in this 27th Club. And it's like, what happened to them? Did they really die?
Probably not.
Exactly. So what's going on here? And just very interesting. And it's always like, it's always suspicious circumstances, or they died alone from some overdose or whatever. And
right.
I don't know.
A lot of these people too. I mean, who dies like I don't know, gracefully? Right. A lot of these rock stars, though, there is like a tinge of like that they died under very bad circumstances. Right. And it's just like, well, what if that's just what's being put out there?
Right.
For whatever reason.
Yeah, totally.
And I've always said, too, that what Hollywood, and I'm not the first one to say this, but what Hollywood does is they really do, they like to build people up to tear them down. That's part of the whole overall structure of things, is they give you the shine, they give you the platform, they give you the clout, they put you in the movies, whatever, but a lot of times what happens is, dude, they're going to fucking design your downfall as well. And that they're going to have the system turn on you, and they're going to have the people turn on you, or whatever.
Right.
So that's kind of a classic sort of thing, which is why I always see like my mom and stuff. She loves Hollywood still, and like Entertainment Tonight, and if that's still even going, probably I would assume.
Sure it is.
But she loves all that stuff, and I haven't heard her talk about this in a while, but kind of occasionally she'll ask, like, oh, well, do you know who so-and-so is? Oh, he's such a great actor and whatever, and he just came out with a movie. And it's some new Hollywood guy or whatever that she is now a fan of, pretty much. And I always think the same thing. I'm like, man, I was like, it's really good riding that sort of wave to the top. But let's see what happens in the next 20 years if you're able to keep your career and whatever. It's very cutthroat, and it's a turn and burn sort of system. You get chewed up and spit out pretty much. Yeah,
and a lot of these industries are like that,
Yeah,
whether
that's true.
Music, and then I'll shout this movie out, but it's not really. I mean, you didn't really care for it, but I really liked it. Neon Demon.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And I think that came out like, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago or whatever, maybe probably more than that. But it's basically looking at the modeling industry in the same lens of like turn and burn, the new whoever the latest and greatest gets put up to the pedestal, while the ones that have been in the game for a long time might get pushed to the side, and then the jealousy and the fucked up shit that happens behind the scenes. And that it's not like it's an unsettling movie in a lot of ways, and it's kind of, there's cheesiness in it too, I guess. Like it's kind of classified, I guess, as a horror film.
It's kind of, and
it's got horror
similar
film themes, but that's a good one if for anybody who might be interested.
I
in
could
it.
see, honestly, and maybe I'm wrong here, but could you see more women liking that movie than men?
Yeah, I could see it because there's more ways to like. I think it's more relatable to a woman.
It's the sister wound stuff.
It is the sister wound stuff, like through and through. Oh my God, that's actually a good point. Shout out Elise from Family Fungi. It is totally the sister wound to the max, and that's probably why I do have a fondness for it.
Right.
Keanu Reeves is in it, and he plays a really scumbag character, but he does a really good job as a scumbag.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, but I don't think there's any bigger names in that one. It's kind of a smaller film.
Right.
Do you remember who the director is?
No, I don't.
Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
kind of worth checking out.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, should we check the chat? It's been a little while. Mm-hmm. Cool. So let's just see who is here hanging out. What's up, Jenny G?
Hey,
nice
Jenny.
to see you. Hope you guys had a nice dinner. I'm sure you did.
Oh, yeah. Happy solstice.
And then anyone else, feel free, actually. I sometimes forget who was here earlier. But Benna, what's going on?
Howdy, Benna.
Sarah G, howdy ho. Pedro is still here hanging out. Flat Earth Hippie makes a good point. The 27 Club being the Saturn return.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah,
for a few
yeah.
different reasons.
Yep.
And he also says we live in a movie. I can't disagree with that, really. The world is indeed a stage. Family Fun Guys here. Elise, hello. Moonlander is still here, hanging out, chilling. Kabir is still here.
Woo!
Very cool. We've got some swell folk.
Yeah, thanks,
in the
guys,
mix.
for hanging out and listening to all of our Summer of
Yeah,
Love ramblings.
Totally. Stacy is here. I don't know if we said hi to Stacy earlier.
Hey, Stacy.
Hello, Stacy. PK is here. What's up, dude?
What's up, PK?
Oh,
King of Cups.
Oh, King of Cups. What's up, Chris?
Hey, Chris.
And then I did see earlier, Ben Balderson was here. What's up, Ben? If he's still hanging out.
Hail, Ben and Christy.
For sure. Robert Page. What's
Howdy,
good?
Robert.
Will Gensky. That seems new.
Hey, Will. What's up?
Hello, Will. And yeah, Bird Dog is still here. So nice, guys. Well, that was a good one. I think that was interesting.
Brandon Stark is here. Endless
Brandon
Summer
Stark.
Highlight.
Hello.
And then we got one other new one here.
I'm clicking names, but our internet sucks, so it just doesn't show up. There it is. Nice. Awesome. What's up, Ben? He is still here.
What's up, Ben?
Nice to see you, man. Cool. So, anything else you wanted to get off your chest with all this stuff?
With this stuff, I mean, I feel like the saga continues. It's just...
What I think we should do
for
whatever, at some point, maybe we'll do it this week, but I think we should rewatch the Woodstock documentary. There's a main documentary. My understanding is there was an original release, and then they did a new director's cut thing or something. And that's what we saw when it came out. And that was very enlightening in regards to Woodstock basically being an open air experiment, PSYOP, MK Ultra type thing.
To the max.
So I think we should totally watch it. Maybe we can take screenshots or whatever, and then we could talk about that at some point.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have a special guest for that one when we present it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Pedro.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Yeah,
okay, I was like, who are you talking about?
Pedro's going to be our guy on the couch with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he wanted to join in for the fun on that one. So I think it'd be fun to do that.
Totally. We'll have to figure out a third mic setup here.
Yeah, I think we have our the Bluetooth ones.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
we don't have to get into the technical aspects of it. or
No,
whatever.
we can figure that out.
But yeah, that's going to be interesting. And then what year was Woodstock?
1969
Right.
in
Damn.
August.
What a huge, I mean, so the end of 1969 was crazy.
It was crazy because the murders, whatever you want to call them, the Manson stuff happened in the beginning of the month. I think it was like August 9th or something, if I remember right. And then Woodstock was the middle of August. It was a weekend. It was like the 15th, 16th, and 17th in August. So, yeah, August was a big month. Big time. A lot
Right.
of stuff happened then.
Totally. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Let's get some credits going, Belb.
All right. Sounds good.
Nice. Awesome. Let's see here. Bada bing, bada boom. There we are. Once again, thank you, patrons.
Yes, as
So,
always.
We mentioned everyone earlier. You guys are so appreciated. Once again, patreon.com/thehealinghome if you'd like to support. And then you've got a show next week with Mary Beth.
Yes, Mary Beth Sanchez of the Growcast. I have to give shout out to Lee Thunder Chicken for putting Mary Beth on my radar. He sent me an episode of the Growcast, which you can listen to on Spotify for sure. But they basically talk all about growing cannabis. So they've got guests on all the time. And so as I said, thank you, Lee Thunder Chicken, for putting her on my radar, because Mary Beth has a lot of gardening experience, not only gardening and growing cannabis, but gardening in general. And if I remember correctly, she's located in Northern California somewhere. So anyway, we're going to talk next week, and I'm looking forward to getting to know her. I don't know her very well. I've only listened to a few of the episodes on Growcast, but I have a feeling that we'll have a good conversation.
Very cool. And then, as always, you've got a full moon offering newsletter coming out this time on the 3rd.
Yep.
So I encourage people to sign up for your newsletter.
Yeah, please do. It's fun. It's a good way to keep in touch with me. And I typically usually share recipes for whatever I'm putting out too. And you can just hear, what were my recent appearances if you're interested in that, what's going on, and know what the offering is. It's a good way.
Totally.
And it's free. And I only send out one email a month, so you're not going to get bombarded with a bunch of crap.
Wait, so do you sell people's information or anything like that?
No, I've thought about it or whatever, but I think
Because you get offers all the time.
yeah, they're offering all sorts of stuff.
Right,
yeah,
right. Totally. And then you still have your last full moon offering available.
Yes, I have one shampoo bar left. Shout out to Still Standing. I got your order and your payment came through for that shampoo bar, so thank you. After that order, I've only got one shampoo bar left, and I've got more mugboard, and I have a couple of calendula salt soaps left, which, by the way, we're using one of those salt bars in the shower right now, and I'll say,
oh, it's awesome.
It is awesome. I freaking love that soap. I like all the soaps I create, but some of them just end up having more of a fondness. But that salt soap, man, is so clearing and cleansing, and it's great. So that's a fun one to work with. If you've never used a salt soap, they're pretty cool.
Hell yeah.
Up here is my menu. Want to just say that I do bulk custom orders for people who are wanting something in a bulk form. So I like the idea of doing like whole batches of soap for somebody. It's an investment on the buyer's end, but to have like a whole batch of soap is pretty cool, because then you just have it and there you go. You got 30 bars of soap or 20 bars of soap, whatever. So that's a possibility if you're into something like that. Otherwise, single items are cool too. So you can hit me up at michelleshealinghome@gmail.com as usual for orders. We are going to be working on an online store, which is really exciting though. So probably by the end of the summer, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so.
We'll definitely have an online store, so you won't have to email me anymore. You'll be able to just go.
I think I think people could do whatever they want.
Yeah, you could still email me.
Yeah.
If that's what you like more.
Right.
But I think having the online store will be easier for a lot of people.
I think most people probably prefer to do that.
Yeah. And then, it's more streamlined. So we're working on that. And michelleshealinghome.com for more information about consultations, my blog, my offerings are up there. And you can call or text me as well, 503-568-1569.
Nice.
And on Tuesday, I talked with Maxine Miller. We had a really nice conversation, and I have to say, I'm so excited to have touched base with her, and I feel like, yeah, it was a milestone in a way. And I told her this, but as soon as I saw her art for the first time, I always wanted to pick her brain and get to know her a little better. And so all these years later, being able to do that was pretty cool. But we talked about her newest release, which is her magical botanical oracle deck that she did with Christopher Pinzek, who is kind of a big name in the witchcraft, plant, Wicca sort of circles. He has a lot of books out, pretty prolific, and he did an amazing job at writing her booklet. Her book for that oracle deck is awesome.
Yeah.
So if you're wanting an oracle deck that actually comes along with a book that you're going to learn a bunch of stuff from, I mean, he goes into medicinal uses for the plants, the magical uses, the folklore, you name it, it's in there. And I was really impressed. I'm actually reading through the book as I would just a book, not even with the cards. So it's very informative and I highly recommend it. So check out that chat if you're into that sort of thing.
Nice. Totally.
Yeah.
Very cool. And you guys really hit it off, by the way.
We did. We actually ended up talking after the show for a good 15, 20 minutes, and I felt a kinship with her in a way. And I could actually even see myself at some point hanging out with her or something like that, which would be really awesome. So
totally,
it was really cool. Yeah,
very cool. I think that's awesome.
And she's in our she's in our area. She's not far from us. So
yeah,
pretty
exactly.
Cool. Yeah.
And then the only announcement I have, I mean, this is just kind of a very simple thumbnail to remind me, but I'm going to be talking to Dr. Narco Longo from Old World, Florida on Monday. And so I'm going to be on his stream, and it's kind of a free-for-all. So what I'm going to talk about, though, I know he has an interest in the fleur-de-lis, and we've talked about this on Instagram before. And I know that I have a perspective on the fleur-de-lis that might be unique to, him. He maybe hasn't heard some of these angles that I've talked about with it, and he seemed intrigued to learn more. So I'm putting together a presentation about that, but definitely going to be talking about the polar tradition, polar symbolism, all that kind of stuff, because it really it lines up so nicely. I think it complements his work in so many different ways, and I think that he's going to appreciate some of these insights and everything else. So I'm putting that all together, and I'm super stoked. We're going to be going live on Monday, I believe at 5 or 6 p.m. Pacific time.
Nice. I'm so excited for you on this one.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to talk to him for a little while.
You have.
It was cool. Juan invited me and said we should definitely chat. So we were originally supposed to talk sometime last year, and it didn't work out scheduling wise, but here we are.
Yeah.
So
as it happens,
totally.
If it's meant to be, it'll be.
For sure. So I'll let people know what's good with all of that stuff as it comes closer. But I think that'll do it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Cool, guys. We will talk to you soon. You guys will see Michelle absolutely on Tuesday.
Yep, I'll be here.
You guys can check me out on Monday, and we will go from there.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. It was fun.
All right. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Later.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.